Welcome to this lunchtime session, Role Models on Your Best Behaviour. My name is Kevin Rooney. I'm a teacher, member of the Institute of Ideas Education Forum, and it was my idea to put on this session on role models. There's bad news and there's good news. The bad news is that one of our speakers, Peter Herbert, pulled out. Peter Herbert from the Society of Black Lawyers. The good news is that we've got an even better speaker as a replacement, which I'll talk about in a second. We have three speakers. Each will speak for 5 minutes. I'll be brutal with the timing, and then we'll go straight out to the audience and we can have a conversation about what we think about the concept of role models. Lindsay on my right will speak first. My extreme left, Stuart Waiton, will speak second. And last but not least, our brilliant replacement here, Peter Tatchell, will speak last for his 5 minutes. Let me give you a few seconds about each speaker and their biographies. Lindsay on my right is a writer and broadcaster, and he's a volunteer for a leadership scheme in Packham with young people, which he'll probably talk about a little bit in his speech. But he shot to fame about 2 or 3 weeks ago. He gave a speech at the Conservative Party conference, and his speech has got far more hits on YouTube than David Cameron's speech at the conference, so you might want to check out his speech, which is really about role models. Next to speak will be Stuart Waiton on my extreme left. Stuart is a sociology and criminology lecturer at the University of Alberta. He's director of the research group Generation Youth Issues. And above all, he's the author of a brilliant little book called Snob's Law, Criminalising Football Fans in an Age of Intolerance. It's a brilliant book, not just because I'm cited several times in it, but it's also in the bookshop at Foyle's at the conference, so I recommend that you check it out. It is a cracking little read. And then we have Peter Tatchell. Peter Tatchell is extremely well known. He's been campaigning for human rights for more than 40 years. He's director of the Peter Tatchell Foundation for Human Rights, and he's a spokesperson for the Green Party on human rights. And he's written numerous books, including The Battle for Bermondsey, Democratic Defence. All you young people probably don't know about Bermondsey, but that was a famous election Peter stood in for the Labour Party, and basically they accused him of being a homosexual and trying to out him and And at a time of mass homophobia, they used that to basically attack him and undermine him, and he lost the seat. But I recommend you check that book out as well. Right, we don't have much time. Can I give you about 1 minute to set the scene? I started thinking about the concept of role models about a year and a bit ago, because when I read the TES, the Times Educational Supplement, I noticed a lot of teachers were getting sacked from their jobs for things that they were doing outside the classroom at the weekend. Teachers were starting to be sacked for being drunk and disorderly. Another teacher was sacked because in his spare time he acted in a gay porn movie. And the question is, should we judge teachers on these types of things outside the classroom? What about footballers who get into brawls or use homophobic or racist language? Should we judge them on that question mark? Yes or no? What about Rihanna, who goes back to her boyfriend who beats her? Does she have a responsibility not to do that, to send the right signals out to young people? What about Justin Bieber, who's underage drinking? What about Miley Cyrus, who's getting down and dirty? Should we expect more of these people in terms of being role models? Should everybody be like Jessica Ennis and Mo Farah, be nice sort of lily white good role models? That's really the backdrop. But look, I'm very conscious that this debate can go in 100 different directions. I know for a fact the speakers will have different angles on the whole debate. So without further ado, I'll let them speak. I might ask them a question, and then we'll go straight out to the floor. So first of all, yourself, 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, everybody. As Kevin said, I'm a writer and broadcaster. I have various hats, but I'm also a volunteer mentor in my spare time for the last 9 years with a scheme in Peckham, South London, called Leaders of Tomorrow. Now, I am, admittedly, it's a very tough love, old school, socially conservative, quite draconian scheme, but we have the best interests of the young people we're trying to help at heart. I'd just like to make a few points this afternoon, just to outline my worldview. Please be generous enough to accept everything I say in a spirit of love, empowerment, and upliftment. The other thing I would like to add just before I do, to preface that, I am certainly no self-appointed community leader. I speak for myself and only for the young people that I help to mentor. There are so many disparate communities out there. There's not just one monolithic black community or Indian community. There are many disparate communities, and I'm only speaking for myself and the young people I help in Peckham. First thing, in my experience, young people, they need parameters. They need guidance, they need discipline, they need love, and they need time. What they don't need are adults trying to be their friends or be down with the kids on their level. Secondly, if we really care about young people, and if we really care about the way that our society is progressing, or not, as the case may be, I think that we as adults need to consciously man up or woman up. And instead of choosing to abdicate our parental, civic, social, or even pedagogic responsibilities, we need to actually start imparting some tangible values to young people. Personally, I don't have a problem with the model of the master and the disciple. I don't have a problem with the old-fashioned concept of a transmission of knowledge from teacher to pupil. Thirdly, I think, unfortunately, at the moment in our society, there's a chronic poverty of aspiration, which is afflicting many young people, especially in certain disadvantaged inner-city environments. And I think a lot of that chronic poverty of aspiration is due to being talked down to by adults. The American civil rights leader Jesse Jackson had a famous phrase, "No one has ever suffered from being talked up to." My thing is that if you actually raise the bar for young people, more often than not, young people will raise their level of achievement and their expectations to meet that expectation. One of my big things that I can't stand, I'm not particularly down with the concept of hip-hop Shakespeare. You know what? Personally, I think it's quite patronizing and invariably, one could argue, racist to only give the black and brown kids in the inner cities a dumbed, watered-down version of a canonical great. Well, you know what? Give them the real thing. Give them the real thing. Expand their cultural horizons. Don't talk down to them. Because often, those who advocate the hip-hop Shakespeare, they're the metropolitan middle-class liberals who themselves have had all the benefits of a wonderful Rolls-Royce Oxford Humanities education. Well, if it's good enough for you, give it to the kids as well. I think we talk down to young people at our peril. Like I said, raise the bar and they'll consciously raise their aspirations to match. In Peckham, at Leaders of Tomorrow, the scheme that I volunteer with, our kids are aged between 14 to 18. We have a tripartite ethos for the scheme. The first one is to raise the academic level of achievement of the young people. You do that, in my opinion, through old school teaching methods. The first thing we start off every week is a vocab slot. Why? Because language is power. I'm very anti-street slang. I have a zero tolerance policy to street slang. Why? I'm not saying that slang can't be linguistically inventive or intellectually fascinating. Of course, slang has been there since the age of Chaucer and Shakespeare. But you know what? 99% of the people in this country who have the power to tangibly affect the lives of my young people don't speak in Peckham patois. So I want my young people to be conversant in the language of power. David Cameron and Ed Miliband don't speak in Peckham patois. They have had a wonderful Oxbridge education. That's what I want for my young people, to have access to environments where they are taken seriously. In an ideal world, the only two things that we'd be judged on in society, the content of our hearts and the caliber of our minds. But you know what? Sadly, we don't live in an ideal world. People will judge my young people on the way they speak, the way they dress, the way they walk. That's why I'm very anti what I call the pimp roll, when the young guys bop down the high street as if they've dislocated their pelvis. I tell the young people, you know what, I'm sorry. It looks stupid, it looks like you need to go to the toilet, okay? If you want to be taken seriously by other people, stand tall, put your shoulders back, look the world in the face. I think it was Marcus Garvey that said, without confidence, we're twice defeated. Another thing that we try and do in Peckham is we try and raise the cultural horizons of the young people outside of SC15. Personally, I'm not really a massive fan of classical music, but I'll take my kids to see a classical music concert. Why? So they can have experienced it. I'm going to take them to the National Theatre or the Young Vic. I'm not going to take them to the Royal Court to see the hip-hop hoodie play. My rationale being, if they can get a 19th century Norwegian parlour room drama, then they'll be able to understand anything. Great art transcends the vagaries of race, time and class. They can get the hip-hop hoodie drama at the Royal Court in half the price and in half the time at the local barbershop. The third thing that I want my kids to have is to develop a fully functioning moral compass. That means integrity, honesty, kindness, compassion. We have big debates about homophobia, things like that. Just to wrap up, I'm hugely in favour of role models. Personally, just the right kind of role models. I've been quoted before as saying, we need less notorious BIGs and more prestigious PhDs. If you had a choice between Obama and the rapper Giggs, 50 Cent or the Martinican poet and playwright Aimé Césaire, Jay-Z or Frantz Fanon, I know which one I'm going to hold up for my young people. It's a great little quotation from Spider-Man. With great power comes great responsibility. The footballers or the rappers, the football or the music might give people the platforms, but they need to be socially responsible. Young people all too often sadly have the wrong kind of role models. In my opinion, the hard-working bus driver can be just as good a role model who provides for his kids as the lawyer or the barrister.
Gonna have to stop you there, Lindsay. Big round of applause. And secondly, we'll go straight over to Stuart.
Yeah, my interest in this, following on from the book, is with role models in football, particularly with concerns about the poor nature of role models. There's the respect agenda, if you know anything about football, discussion about racist language. This is to do with fans, but mainly players. Bad language is discussed as a problem potentially in football, and even smoking. And the Jack Wilshere example, I think, is very interesting. He's been humiliated into making an apology for being seen smoking a cigarette. This is clearly not a good example, it appears, as players as role models. And in this case, the problem is that he's not seen as the correct bastion of everything health and safety. What illustrates this, I think, is interesting is the way that private behaviour is being challenged and being seen as a problem. And it directly appears also to often relate to specific government policies that are in fashion at the time. Few people seriously argued that Wilshere smoking was undermining his ability to play. It was more the example that he was setting for people, and especially children in society, that was seen as a problem. And you could argue that if football players were seen to be smoking all the time, that might appear that makes smoking sexy, okay. Although I think that's a rather simplistic and patronising sentiment. There's a patronising quality to this understanding about why people do certain things, why people smoke, for example. And it's that patronising quality of the role model discussion within football it suggests to me that what they mean by a role model is a peculiar thing, and to me, in many respects, the opposite to what I would consider as a role model. You can, if you want to, dismiss the whole role model discussion in football. So, for example, Gary Neville, who I think is an excellent pundit, makes the point that if discussing all the unethical things he's done in football, which are many and varied, he just says, well, if you want a moral lecture, go to church. You're not going to get it from me. Right? So he's quite clear about that. And I think there is a strong point about that in relation to what football is. And the fact that the nature of football is tribal, competitive, aggressive, and I would even say slightly out of control, both on and off the pitch, makes it a very peculiar place to expect a role model, certainly during the game environment itself. However, if we are to accept the role model question and say there's something in this within football, then let's have a look at it, because I think there's something peculiar about the discussion in football. So for me, following on from the last speaker, I think a role model would be someone who I would look up to, who you expect to be a leader, who you expect to be strong, and in the context of football, you'd expect them to be tough. So at a football level, you'd maybe say John Terry. Well, I'm not sure if he's that tough, but John Terry. I would pick more Roy Keane, who I suspect is one of the most respected footballers amongst his generation of players. Or you could look at managers. Right? It's people like Mourinho. So it's certain types of people I would look up to and think that that's what I think of as a role model. And I was looking at Martin Luther King story was on this year, and part of his I Have a Dream speech, he makes the point, I have a dream that my children will not be judged by their colour of their skin, but the content of their character. And I really like this term, this idea of character. And interestingly, you never hear this discussion of character in the context of role models within football. Although people in general, when you discuss about it, talk about the character of a player. It's recognised in the game that you want strong characters. Within the role model discussion, it's not part of what's actually discussed. In fact, very much the opposite. Footballers who have character as individuals, I would argue, are problematic. Very much because these types of people know their own mind, and role model advocates don't want people who know their own mind. They want puppets who are prepared to do and say what they are told. You need people like Jack Wilshere to accept the diktat of health and safety executives. You need Arsene Wenger to come out and denounce him publicly. You need Wilshere to then make a humiliating, scripted apology. And the artificiality of all these statements appears to be irrelevant, as is the degrading spectacle that is created. And indeed, it's the fact that all these involved are in many respects, I would argue, being infantilized and feel the need to dance like puppets to the official line that's being led. And I think you find these scripts are often given out. Literally, scripts are given to players to read about anti-racism, where they're forced to say certain things. Scripts about shaking a hand. You have to shake hands before the game. This sort of artificial, almost teacher telling the child how to behave in these situations. So to sum up, I think the reality is that they don't want role models in terms of people with character, people who are leaders, or who know their own minds and opinion. Today's role model is an empty puppet who will do what he is told to do, a characterless, artificial conduit who barely resembles an adult, let alone someone to look up to.
Thanks very much. Give him a round of applause, guys. And last but not least, yourself, Peter.
I guess I'd like to start by going backwards in time to who were my role models when I was growing up. Well, in my very early school boy days, I was an aspiring 5,000 and 10,000 meter runner. So one of my important role models was Ron Clarke, the Australian athlete who at one time I think held every world record from 2 miles to half marathon. He was an example to me of something to look up to, aspire to follow in the footsteps of. Another role model for me was my grandfather. He began life after leaving school at 14 as a farm labourer in a remote part of the state of Victoria, and went on to become a player for Collingwood, one of the leading teams in the Victorian AFL League, and then later to join the police force. And he helped expose corruption in the police force, which held back his career for 20 years. But eventually he went on to become chief of police. So his incredible journey from a very impoverished, excluded background to achieve that level of achievement in football and in the police service, that was an inspiration to me, a role model, if you like. In terms of my own human rights campaigning, I'd say that I've probably got 5 role models. Mohandas Gandhi, Sylvia Pankhurst, Martin Luther King, and to some extent Malcolm X and Rosa Luxemburg. From those people I've taken inspiration at the ideals and values they've strived for, the methods and campaigns they've won. To me, it's very important to have role models, people whose experience, whose ideas you can look at, examine, aspire to follow, aspire to develop, adapt, initiate in your own particular way. I think for anyone who is striving to achieve anything of note, to have a role model, to have someone to look to as an inspiration is a very important, not only inspiration, but also a guide to how to do it and how to succeed. Today, when we look around us, who are the popular role models? They tend to be pop and sports stars, not politicians, religious leaders, scientists or writers. And I think a lot of this issue that Stuart has raised around the distinction between public versus private is an important aspect about the way in which role models are seen today. Speaking for me personally, I think it's good if people aspire to and live a good life. It's good if they have a moral compass. It's good if they are exemplary in their character and behaviour. But at the end of the day, I think we should judge people in the public sphere on the job they do and not necessarily on what they may do in their private life. So there are undoubtedly some very famous people in all walks of life who maybe do not treat their partners or their children well. And that, of course, is regrettable. But should their contribution to science or literature be devalued because of what they've done in their personal family life? I don't think so. Likewise, when pop stars and performers behave badly, taking drugs, getting drunk, doing dangerous, reckless things. At one level, people are right to say they're not setting a good example. But is that an obligation for someone who is, a Premier League footballer? I don't think so. I think we need to make that distinction. And unless something that a person has done or said has an impact upon their job, I don't see why they should be judged, for the most part, on their private behaviour.
Brilliant. Round of applause. Okay, let me just ask a question, which is less a question than thinking out loud, really, and I hope it comes across as relatively mediated. Would I be right in thinking that the socialisation process is breaking down at the moment? I mean, something that was implicit and organic, the way that parents would bring up children and the way we would school them in education, is it a reality or a myth or a perception that we seem to be struggling? We're worried about how we're bringing up the young generation, and into that vacuum emerges this really bizarre concept of role models. And Stuart, I thought you drew that out quite well. The Jack Wilshere thing is really interesting. So you get these people to almost publicly recant. It's almost Orwellian or Stalinist. You will tell the public to err of your ways. Young people look at Jack Wilshere relenting and recanting for the bad thing he did, and you will learn the moral lesson from that. Or am I being utterly cynical, and that's the wrong way to look at it, and actually we do need a wee bit more of that type of stuff where we point out at every opportunity the problems in society, and that we do expect some standards and decency, etc. Does that question make sense to the panel? Anybody want to pick up on it? Don't all shout at once.
Well, I mean, this is taking on a tangent. I do think there's a confusion of roles in this discussion. I mean, the fact that we look to football players to act as role models, I mean, that suggests to me society is in serious trouble. I mean, I don't know if you've met many football players, but you might want them to be your role model to kick a football, but I wouldn't expect Wayne Rooney to be my model for anything more substantial in life, and nor should he be. So there is a problem with that, I think, in terms of the confusion about what roles different people should have. I mean, it's like what Peter was saying, there's a problem today where politicians and senior figures in society are no longer looked to. And that seems to be, to me, what's happening, is that they recognise that no one gives a toss about them. And so they say, well, what do young people look up to as far as they imagine? Oh, it's footballers, therefore we must make footballers act like angels, and they must carry all our policy documents around with them while they're on and off the pitch. Otherwise, Jesus, what's going to happen to our world? There's a certain paranoia there about things.
Okay, Lindsay, what's your take on this? Because I don't know if a lot of the audience, some of the audience might have been there this morning, but you were speaking on a session on hip-hop, and it sort of came up a little bit about, some of the homophobic lyrics and so on that certain music sort of generates, and whether or not we should accept that, or why we need an element of our musicians and everybody else to be role models, or at least have social responsibility. What's your take? What's the balance on this whole discussion?
I'm a big fan of social responsibility, but just before I answer your question, at the risk of sounding a touch too hagiographic, I think it's worth pointing out, and I'm sure you already know, that we're in the presence of a living legend and a role model on the panel, and I feel very honoured to be sitting with Peter here, especially for many of you, and myself included. He's been a role model to me, somebody who stood up for what he believes in, and often at great personal cost. Coming back to the direct question, I'm a massive fan of social responsibility when it comes to hip-hop, ragga lyrics. In an ideal world, of course, there should be complete artistic freedom, and yes, you can write about whatever you like, but you know what? I'm not down with hate music. I'm not down with Bun Up the Batman them, and Buju Banton, Boom Bye Bye, or Elephant Man, or Beanie Man, or Capleton, whoever it is that wants to log on and step on Chichi Man or whatever. I have no time for that. I'm a humanist. We've all got the same red blood. There's that wonderful quotation from Terence, the Latin dramatist, who's also an African slave from Carthage, who said, "I'm a human being, and I consider nothing human alien to me." And that's one of the tenets that we try and teach the young people in Peckham. Whilst I agree with Stuart that clearly we're looking to the wrong people if we expect Wayne Rooney to give us an erudite answer about the subprime mortgage quandary or the Eurozone crisis, it should be just about his ability to kick a football into the back of a net. But sadly, the society in which we live seems to have muddled the two, and young people, very, very unfortunately, look to these sportsmen and these rappers as fonts of wisdom, these kind of Delphic oracles who seemingly and supposedly are going to have the answers to all the questions. Whereas, and this is where the roles of teachers, the roles of social workers, the roles of mentors, the roles of parents, the roles of uncles and aunts, I think we do need to step up to the plate and acknowledge that there is. Yes, I'm loath to curtail the artistic freedom in the hip-hop and ragga canon, but you know what? We do need to grow up. We do need to recognise hate music for what it is and the negative ramifications that these lyrics can have on young minds.
Peter?
I think there's a big moral quandary here, in the sense that we're talking about role models and expectations of certain people in the public eye, and that's fine. But there's also another degree to which I think people are less confident nowadays about saying what's right and what's wrong. And I do think there is, not in every instance, but in most instances, there is a right and a wrong. Sexual violence against women or men is not right. Promoting hate against anyone is not right. And there is a struggle and a quandary over to what extent people have freedom to say whatever they want, to do whatever they want, and to what extent we establish sort of a set of moral principles or support a set of moral principles that try and guide people in the right way for their personal benefit and for the wider social benefit. And I think this lack of confidence means that this sort of a cultural relativism is there in the public sphere, where we're very reluctant and nervous and unconfident about saying what we think is right and what we think is wrong.
Okay, really just if you can give the one sentence answer, and then I'm going to go out, and particularly to you. You said we need to look at teachers and social workers and so on. Can I ask, what about that point I started off with? If a teacher's getting up to, well, let's just say no good, is a bit of a wild man or woman at the weekend, and doing things which might be morally questionable, do you think that we should seize upon that because they have to effectively be a role model all the time? Or do you think it's none of your business, none of our business?
Whilst everybody's entitled to a private life, and there is the argument, do as I say, not as I do, I think it would be better if there was a harmonious marriage between what you practice and what you preach.
So the fella who's in the gay porn movies in his spare time, problem, would you sack him?
That's a hard one. He didn't get sacked, did he?
Okay. I'm out on the beer at the weekend. Some fella, me have an argument and I headbutt him or whatever, and I get done for drunk and disorderly. You know, I'm not saying I am, but say I was an inspiring, great teacher in the classroom. Do we say, well, it's none of our business, the law dealt with that? Or do we say, no, you need to be a role model, and that's not on?
I think it's harder to reconcile. It becomes very problematic if you have somebody standing up in front of a group of young people advocating a certain type of behaviour, and then at the same time...
They're not advocating it. The students might not even know, but the General Teaching Council, which has just ceased to exist, have sacked lots of people for being drunk and disorderly at the weekend. I just want a straight answer, you know, and it's fair enough. I like it when people are brave. Should we just say that's not on? Whether you like it or not, in the current period, you must be a role model in and outside of the classroom, so sacked.
I think certain jobs come with certain responsibilities that have, I guess, extracurricular ramifications. So I would veer more to that.
Brilliant.
Side.
Okay, we've got
Can I give you a more difficult example? This is the case of an Edinburgh University lecturer about 10 or more years ago. I think his name was Chris Brand.
Yes.
He wrote an article about paedophilia.
Yes.
And was sacked, even though the article was not about his teaching work or was not the coursework. He wrote an article for an academic journal, but it wasn't related to his university work or contract whatsoever. Now I don't agree with what he wrote, but I feel very uneasy about the fact that he was sacked for simply expressing a point of view in a very intellectual argument. He wasn't advocating, as far as you may correct me wrong, I don't think he was advocating child sexual abuse. He was looking at the history and the culture and the differences in different cultures towards intergenerational sexual relationships.
Yeah.
And some people would argue that is a legitimate area of academic freedom. Yeah. Well, the university decided not, and he was sacked. He lost his job.
Yeah. Just before I go out to the audience, I'll give one more example, which is really interesting. David Norris, 2 years ago, 18 months ago in the Republic of Ireland, there was the presidential race to be president. David Norris, a gay politician, was leading the race. He was the favourite to become president. And 10 years earlier, in a magazine interview, he was asked a question about paedophilia, and he talked about pedantry in ancient Greek society and how he didn't have a problem with pedantry. That's the idea that the men would sleep with young boys.
Pedestry.
Pedestry. Thank you for putting me right
Pedantry.
there. Thank you very much. Thank you. And so they pulled this article up from 10 years previously, and lo and behold, all of the politicians from all the political parties, he was an independent, said, you're a bad role model even to be standing in this election. And they put massive pressure on him. He had to stand down. And it is an interesting discussion, split Ireland in two, as to whether or not, you know, he was a bad role model or whether or not that was fine. He should just still stand in the election. So it's interesting. There are lots of moral quandaries. Out to you guys. We've got 25 minutes.
Yeah, I was interested in Peter Tatchell's initial take on role models. He talked about the role models that were important for him growing up. And it raises an important distinction, given the way that the discussion then broadened out, because to me, it's about who chooses your role models. You were choosing who your role models were. Today, young people have them chosen for them. So that's just an observation, really, but it relates to something else I wanted to say quickly. First of all, a question. Should role models stay off Twitter? That's the first question. It relates to something I want to say now. It's going to tell a story, really, because when role models who are chosen for us, the problem with that is it can just descend into absurdity. So sometimes the role models who are chosen for us or our children turn bad, or rather, it's not that they turn bad; it's that they revert to their true selves, as opposed to the squeaky clean version being modelled. And I have in mind Rio Ferdinand. A couple of years ago, people will remember this. He is and was an ambassador for Show Racism, the Red Card, the anti-racism schools charity. And during the John Terry saga, at the point that it reached court trial, Rio retweeted to his 2 million followers a comment along the lines that Ashley Cole, in supporting John Terry at the trial, was a chalk ice, quote unquote. So, which is a term that means white on the outside, black on the inside, and
All the way around, black on the outside.
Sorry, sorry. And in doing so, he caused a certain amount of a stir, but in fact, the Show Racism, the Red Card didn't have a problem with it at all. In fact, they said nothing about it. And a child that in my town of Brighton kind of like questioned it because he was doing a project at school, and his mother actually rang up Show Racism, the Red Card, and they just said, look, we all make mistakes. But you can see that the problem there is just manifest, which is that the role models who are chosen for us have to be exemplars of squeaky clean values that aren't ours. They're values that are being pushed down onto us. And of course, it all cracks up and falls apart at moments, and it's very transparent.
Thank you very much. Good point.
Thank you. With Peter, I agree with the comments about inspiration. I think that's really great. I think a role model is who inspires you, and that could be anyone. What Stuart's saying about footballers, I think that's due to relatability. They can relate to them a lot more than politicians. David Cameron, I don't think many people, of any class community can relate to if they don't go to private school or whatever. He's a lot different to relate to. But the one thing that I would like to say about right and wrong is that Chris Brown, if he, if a normal, non-famous person did that to Rihanna, he probably would be in jail for a lot longer. And I think that's one area that needs to be spoken about and argued, that whether they're showing differences and because they're famous and role models because of law, and it's changing. And I think I'd like to hear your opinion on that. Thank you.
I wanted to come back to Lindsay's point, and it's really about...
Keep it, Mike, dear.
Sorry. It's about the hip-hop Shakespeare thing. I just felt that was a little unfair, because I suppose I come from the kind of middle-class educators category that you referred to, and I work at the University of East London, and I teach literature, and we have a lot of non-standard entry students. And I kind of slightly resent the idea that we would teach hip-hop Shakespeare. I have seen it done once at Catford Theatre in a Shakespeare festival, and myself and all the parents were absolutely horrified and thought it was really, really patronising. The closest I've got to it for myself, teaching Shakespeare, has probably been to show Baz Luhrmann's film, which does have the original language in. And I think the point about this really is that where I think that kind of dumbing down, debased culture comes from is certain aspects of popular culture and commercialism, not educators who believe very passionately in the power of what we might refer to as high culture. I mean, that might involve questioning the dead white males canon from time to time and introducing really interesting post-colonial writers that have done really amazing, valuable work. But it certainly doesn't mean, I don't think, patronising and denying students from non-standard entry backgrounds the right to a really good education. I just wanted to make that distinction.
Thank you very much.
Yeah?
Lots of people want to speak.
So with the issue of sort of teachers' personal life versus careers, basically, I think the issue is, for example, the teacher in the gay porn, the porn will become public and it will then be displayed to potentially his pupils. So his
Certificate 18 it was.
Pardon?
It was a joke. It was Certificate 18, but students shouldn't be watching accurate films. But
yeah, it happens. And
yes,
then,
it does. It does.
So his private life then became public. So in that case, I guess we can say that he should be sacked. But if it becomes the case that every time a teacher is unresponsible in their private life. It's sort of a case of we need good teachers, basically, in society. And it's a sort of, what's the word? Deterrent to be a teacher if you know that I have to sign away my private life in order to display a good role model. And then again, there's the issue with that not being realistic. Eventually, if they are forced to sort of shut the real person up inside, it will show out. And then surely that will cause a bigger problem.
Keep the mic and let me ask you the question. So that teacher acting on the gay porn film is your teacher. You find him, he's a good teacher in your school. He's doing the business with your class. Honestly, what do you think? When I say doing the business, he's educating. I mean, he's educating you very well. He's inspiring you with the love of learning, etc. Honestly, what do you think? What would be your position? Just sack or not sack?
I think I'd like to still have him as a teacher, but at the same time, he sort of violated his responsibility. So it's a tough one, but
yeah, that's great. That's great, even the way you paused the answer. That cuts to the nub of the question. Thanks very much.
Isn't one of the problems we've got here is that we're holding the wrong kind of role models to the wrong kinds of standards? I mean, just to pick up Stuart's points here, we're talking about, I mean, footballers as role models, which, you know, just seems mad to me. But the kind of standards that we're holding them to is we're saying, you know, you've got to shake hands with this person and we're going to come down on you like a ton of bricks if you don't do that, or if you sort of say some rude names to someone. But, you know, you point out Roy Keane as an example. I mean, Roy Keane actually sort of, you know, he deliberately broke someone's leg, ended their career, and, you know, faced no censure at all from the FA about that. I mean, where, you know, shouldn't that be the kind of standard that we actually sort of, you know, step onto him over? I mean, in terms of other things, I mean, I can't think of any sort of role model that, you know, that in my life. I mean, I certainly can't think of anyone on the platform at the moment. But as I say, I mean, I think shouldn't we sort of, you know, when people sort of hold themselves up as role models, we should be sort of coming down on them in terms of examples of hypocrisy, in terms of when they've been sort of economical with the truth. I'm thinking of someone in particular here. And as I say, I mean, you know, these are the kind of standards that we should be going for. It shouldn't be about just sort of, you know, these superfluous issues.
Who are you thinking about with the truth?
I'm thinking of Peter Tatchell.
Economical with the truth?
Yeah, I can remember several accusations several years ago that he made towards members of the Catholic Church, where he claimed that there were cover-ups and the Pope had ordered cover-ups in terms of paedophile priests, which, you know, just crap.
Dead on. Dead on. And then lastly, yourself, and then back to the panel to pick whatever they want up.
I'm having a problem with this idea that role models are chosen for you. I don't know about anybody else here, but I pride myself not knowing anything about popular culture. I think my role model is more likely to be Margaret Thatcher than Miley Cyrus, but what's wrong with having a bad role model? What's wrong with looking up to, say, Amanda Bynes and saying, I want to be rich, I want to get paid for doing drugs. That's the way I want to live my life. Why is it parents' responsibility to say, these people are bad people? I mean, obviously it's parents' responsibility to make sure that your child grows up as a moral person, but who are they to say, this is an immoral person, you're impacting my child by living your life how you want to live it?
Thank you very much. Can I ask you not to pick up everything? And if you could be fairly brief, it allows us to get back out to the floor. Who would like to go first?
I'm quite anti-hip-hop Shakespeare. The phenomenon exists in popular culture, especially in the inner cities, and I find it a very patronising approach in the same way that often the majority of people who advocate slang and who the academics, liberal academics, who write great tomes on how wonderful slang is, well, I do write for the Daily Mail. They often have had the benefit of a wonderful academic education themselves. They wouldn't have got that platform to write those books on slang had they not had a grammatically correct education. Last year, the Evening Standard theatre critic, Henry Hitchens, wrote a book called The Language Wars, which came out very much in favour of a culturally relativist approach to language and slang. And in the Daily Telegraph, Charles Moore reviewed the book, and he said, I know absolutely nothing about Henry Hitchens, but I can guess that he wasn't brought up on a council estate in Newcastle. Turns out that Henry Hitchens went to Eton and Christ Church, Oxford. Usually, those are the types of people who can have the intellectual luxury to think that slang and hip-hop Shakespeare is absolutely wonderful. When you're actually on the ground in the grassroots, it's not helping, it's not really empowering, it's actually trapping those young people in the inner cities. That's my point.
I agree with you, and what I'm saying is all of my academic colleagues would completely agree with you.
Okay, Peter.
I think role models can be very mixed in sort of the messages they send. You mentioned Jose Mourinho as a great role model, and I think a lot of people would probably see him as such. But then last year, during an UEFA match in Moscow, he used the word faggots, and as an insult, as an abuse. No one picked him up on it. UEFA did nothing, the FA did nothing. I'm not saying they should have, but even some great role models have their moments of mistake and misjudgment. I'd like to throw out the question whether people feel if we are dumbing down in terms of role models today compared to previous generations. My perception is that we are in general, not entirely, but I'd like to hear some feedback about that. In terms of Chris Brown and Rihanna, and for that matter O.J. Simpson, you could argue the fact that they've got away with it means that we expect less from our role models. That here you've got Chris Brown, this great star, or O.J. Simpson, they allegedly or in court were proven to have done terrible things, yet they got a much lesser sentence than an average person would have. And the final point about hip-hop Shakespeare, at the risk of being held down, I think Shakespeare is overrated. I love Shakespeare, but I think he is overrated and over-venerated. And I would say that there is some hip-hop culture which has great poetry. I think of Tiny Temper's song Invincible. There's a few lines in there which are, to me, absolutely classic, extraordinary love poetry of the highest order, and as great as Shakespeare's sonnets in a different genre.
Can I come back to that?
No. Stuart.
Roy Keane, I agree. I think the leg breaking thing was absolutely horrendous, and it's amazing that he's got away so lightly with that. Hip hop. I was invited to a Royal Society meeting once in Edinburgh, and the presentation they were given there, all attended by the people who've got the best education imaginable, and the guy was presenting the glory of hip-hop Shakespeare at this event, and I was the only person saying this is absolute patronising crap amongst this very, very middle-class audience. Just to throw this is too comfortable and cosy here, and part of my talk, which I was going to go on to but I didn't have time, was this question of strength and weakness, because I think actually society and the role model discussion today actually validates what I would describe as an abuse identity and encourages us to think of ourselves as fragile. One of the things that's come out of this conference so far, which I think is fascinating, is this question of domestic violence, especially domestic violence against men. I can tell you now, in 10 years' time, I predict that the main people that will be seen as abused in society will be men by their partners. I've been slapped a number of times by the women I go out with because I'm bigger than all the rest of it. In 10 years' time, that will be interpreted that I've had domestic violence and I'm an abuse victim. In football, I was at a debate at Motherwell Football Club 3 days ago, and this big, strong football player sitting next to me, who played in the 1970s and 1980s, suddenly stood up and said, I was abused as a player. What he meant was the fans were calling him names and saying, I shagged your missus. Right? And he says, that's abuse. And I was abused as a player. And we've now got a situation where actually we are validating the idea of weakness, and that we are being encouraged to see ourselves as being abused. And that is actually seen as a role model, because you're meant to report this, you're meant to, that individual is being held up and valued in society, rather than what I would see should be valued as someone who's strong and all the rest of it.
So vulnerability is the role model of contemporary society, you're saying. Look, the clock is going to beat us. The next time we come back, guys, it has to be a roundup, so just pick what you can. I'm not going to get everybody in. Can I ask, hands up first of all, who wants to ask a question, not make a comment? Yeah.
How much is it more about our own anxieties and about conformity than really about the idea of a role model? After all, young people actually want to choose different They don't look for one person to be everything in their life. They're looking for bits and pieces of different people, and it's up to them. And how much is it about actually us and our anxiety? And I refer to what Stuart just said, this idea of the diminished person and this idea that we have to conform. And, and actually young people will do exactly the opposite because they need to do that. They need to assert themselves and find their identity. And the more we as adults say, you have to be like this, the more we're trying to get them to conform to our own idea.
Thank you very much. Yourself.
Hi, thanks. Just a couple of things, really. In terms of, we talked a lot about football analogies and role models. I think one of the key things is not necessarily to look at the person, but look at what someone's achieved. So look at people. I think Dr. Les Henry a few years ago used the phrase goal models, and maybe that's what some of the panel were alluding to. Look at how somebody became a great athlete or a great footballer or a great politician, not so much the person and their character, but, to be a Premier League footballer or a politician or someone of authority, you've obviously done the right things to achieve, and I think maybe that's what young people can look at. Some people said young people are given role models. I don't agree. I think young people are smart enough to choose their role models. You can choose good role models or bad role models. It's your decision. For example, myself, when I was younger, my role models would have been people like Sting and Seb Coe. And Sting, whether you like him or not, one of the things he does, he reads a lot. He talks about his books in his interviews. When I was a young kid, I think, okay, Sting's talked about this book. I'll go and read that book, and he, reads decent, good quality literature. Seb Coe, I think, again, he's done great things as an athlete. He's gone on to do great things as a politician and running the Olympics. So I think if you choose the right role models and look at what they do, then that's that. If you want to choose wrong role models, that's up to you.
Great debate. Great debate. I detest both of those characters. It's really interesting, isn't it? That's an interesting point. Who has the mic at the moment?
I just want to ask a really simple question because everyone seems to have conflicting opinions on what a role model is, and I just want to ask the panel, how would you, as individuals, define a role model?
I still think we're partly looking at the wrong problem here. I disagree with Stuart slightly when he says, great role models, people like Jose, I can't even say his name, Mourinho, etc. Because we're still looking at the wrong people. His job is to pick 11 players in a team. It's not something people are going to take inspiration for. I mean, actually, if you think about Peter's original role models, they're people who had vision about the world, people like Rosa Luxemburg or Martin Luther King. And the problem surely today is the people who should be providing vision, whether it's in literature or politics or religion, are not doing that. Where is the vision of Cameron, church leaders and people from literature? And the problem is that those people more and more talk about private character. They want to be judged on private character in elections, etc. And they're not talking about vision. So we have this confusion of private and public sphere. We're still looking at the wrong people. We need to find role models who can inspire people with vision. I have to cut you off.
I'm really sorry. Higher aspirations. Good point.
2 quick questions. The first one is, do people in the public eye consent to be role models? You're taking the example of Wayne Rooney, who's an excellent footballer. But has he consented to being a role model? The second question, which is a slight twist on the question, is, do role models need public support when they're engaged in a battle against corrupt authority? Or is it a question of, we'll back you when the going is good, but don't come to us when the going gets tough? I'm thinking of the Lawrence family, for instance.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Speakers on the platform, I'm really sorry, but you've got only 1 minute to make whatever final point you want. Who would like to go first? Lindsay.
I think a role model, in answer to your question, is somebody a man or a woman who elevates the human spirit and by their actions, thoughts, words or deeds helps to make the world a better place. I think that part of the problem, unfortunately for young people in this country and elsewhere around the world, is that they're being presented with a very limited array of role models. For example, it's October, it's Black History Month. Unfortunately, in my opinion, the same old suspects keep on coming up. As wonderful and as great as Martin Luther King, Malcolm X are, you know what? Why haven't we heard more about Frantz Fanon? Why aren't we hearing about CLR James? Why aren't we hearing about Derek Walcott, Langston Hughes, etc., and lots of other high-achieving women as well? I think we need a multiplicity of role models. There are too many restrictions on what the young people are being offered, and as a result, invariably, it's only hip-hoppers and footballers who squander their money. So maybe we try and get back to the basics about what constitutes a good role model.
Thanks, Lindsay. Peter.
On the point whether pushing role models or setting role models will actually encourage young people to do the opposite. You know, there's an interesting point. I think it may, to some people, but not to others. You can live in a society which has one set of values and pushes those values very strongly, and particular role models, but all throughout history, young people have often rebelled against the role models that have been set for them. In terms of whether they're chosen or imposed, the same kind of dilemma. I think, you know, we don't live in a state where everything is so monolithic and hegemonic that role models are simplistically imposed upon people. But obviously there are certain role models constantly in the tabloid press or on TV, and they are perhaps the most popular, well-known ones, which excludes out from the public sphere a wider range and diversity. And the final point about what is a role model, well, I guess ultimately it's whoever you choose your role model to be.
Thank you, Peter. And last but not least, Stuart.
Yeah, I forgot that question. What is a role model? I think a role model essentially is somebody that does continually does things that terrify them in terms of their life. So if something you are scared of doing it and you do it, then I think you will become a role model. I agree with this point here in terms of the public role. I think there's a problem because they have elevated the private spheres. The teachers' examples are interesting in relationship to that. It actually seems to undermine the importance of your public life, because surely what's important about a politician is his politics. What's important about a teacher is their teaching. It's important, you know, and so on and so on. And it's almost as if we've lost a recognition that these things are important, and we seem to have become obsessed about the sort of micromanagement of private life. So there seems to be a problem there. I think ultimately the role model discussion in football, to me, seems to be driven by fear, and a fear of freedom, and a fear of people, especially the public, to see people who are different and do different things. So it seems, especially in football, I mean, it's very, very clear. You have to be the most politically correct, emotionally correct, health zealot imaginable in football. And if you're not, they seem to be terrified about this because they don't trust us to actually be able to see different types of characters and individuals in the world. So it's to me, that's what's driving that discussion.
Give them a round of applause. Guys, I'm not sure we resolved anything today, but I hope it got you thinking about public-private